Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, there's no mistake, I've gone mad for Konflikt 47 because I love the crazy steam, diesel, high-tech punk thing going for them. These guys are the automated infantry for the British forces, and they're a lot of fun. These are the old metal miniatures, and I'm going to talk a little bit about assembling them because they can be a tiny bit fiddly, but once they're together, they're pretty sturdy. And as you can see, yeah, they do the job. They're nice and easy to paint, it doesn't take very many paints either, and they will all be in the description below. Now, there's timestamps if you want to skip my rambling about assembly, so jump ahead if you fancy that, but all the same, let's get started. So a real quick note on assembly, because these guys, the original fellas at least, they are metal, and they are quite spindly. Assembling them was a little bit of a challenge. What I found was easiest was to make sure that I had gone to all of the contact points, so all of the ball joints, and made sure that they were sanded rather than just hit with the file. Sanding them with a little bit of fine grit paper did give a little bit more texture for the super glue to seep into and grip, which really helped with assembly. I then held the torso and basically pushed the two legs together to get a feel for how they were going to hang and how far apart they needed to be to make sure that the feet would be level on the ground. I then glued on one leg and the other and let that dry thoroughly before coming up to do the arms. Now the arms were a little bit trickier, but what I discovered after doing a couple of them is that it's easiest to lead with the left arm to look at the pose you're going to get and get a feel for putting that wrist joint up roughly horizontal. And then you'll find you can start gluing on the other one. The right arm, while the super glue isn't completely set, you've got a little bit of wiggle room. So you can hold up the MG, let that set, and then, like I said, everything was done in stages and allowed to dry thoroughly. So after about 10-15 minutes of letting the arm dry, then I glued in the MG at last. And yeah, end result is pretty easy. Certainly more so than I thought it was going to be. But once they are finished being assembled, it's time to prime them. Now, here's where we get into a fun discussion about a color called SCC2, which is sometimes called service brown. Now, this was one of the camo colors that was used by British forces during World War II in reality. And it normally served as the base for other colors to go over the top of it, normally greens and similar, so that you had a disruptive pattern. Now, what color service brown actually was, there are arguments online, far more than I've actually seen for things like field gray. The consensus, a lot of the original examples and photos and what have you have disappeared from the internet, which is wildly unhelpful. But what I have discovered, generally speaking, if you want just one color out of a pot to be service brown, then Dark Earth from Vallejo is the one that's most commonly recommended by scale modeling enthusiasts. Close to that is Leather Brown from the Army Painter, which I have primed these guys in. Bonuses, most of the work is done for us. Now you might wonder why not do these guys in green since they are armored, and in part it's because the shift in tone and sort of vibe for Konflikt 47 has the British and the Americans not necessarily at odds, but it isn't one big group of happy allies anymore. And Konflikt 47 has sort of factionalized the armies just a bit more. So the visual language, even when you go and look at the army lists on their download page, does list the British stuff as being brown rather than green. So to kind of lean into that and to make these guys a little more fitting, gosh, I want to talk about this. I've primed them in leather brown because I want SCC2, I want service brown to be the color of the majority of my armor. So, with that out of the way, there isn't actually all that much on these guys that needs painting. Where I'm going to start is with Iron Warriors. This one's from Citadel. It is a very, very dark gunmetal. So something like heavy metal from the John Blanche Army Painter range. That'll do the job as well. Or even you could go to the metallic black from the Vallejo Model Air range will work quite well here. Just something nice and dark. and sinister. So as well as the Brownings on these guys, there are a couple of little sort of funky nodule things on the sides, which on the product page for the automated infantry shows them as like a almost black. So I'm going to assume that they are a funky metallic thing and paint these in too. So these little bubbles, and the rest I'm going to leave in primer brown because I don't want to fuss with these guys any more than I have to. Now, on this happy chappy, I've painted in the entire Browning and the ammo box with Iron Warriors. On the other two fellas, I didn't paint the ammo box. I've got an idea for that, and I'm going to do it differently on this guy too. There's nothing saying you have to, I just think it's going to look cool. What I have got is a little bit of white, and this is matte white from the Army Painter. It does not matter one jot what brand you're going to use, it's white paint. So as well as a little dial on his chest, I'm going to pop a little bit of this on the eye thingies. Now, I made an awful mess of his eyes, but there is a good reason for that. What I'm going to turn to now is a tiny wee bit of pure red. And again, this one doesn't have to be pure red. It can be any red that you like the look of. I'm just going to mark that little dial there with some of this. Now, for any of the brassy parts, what I have here is true copper. Now, this is actually quite close to Balthazar gold, if you want to stick to Citadel stuff. Any brassy color here will do the job. Like I said, we aren't really going for historical accuracy on our fighting robots, but this will look pretty good. There is another little metallic bit which is shown on most of these guys, and it is, I mean, it looks kind of like a medal at first. So I'm using here plate mail metal, but the longer I look at it, it starts to look more like a setting dial. So, you get somebody tall to reach up, dial this, set the killamajig to murder, and off he goes. Now I've got some leather brown from the pot, and this is where I'm going to tidy up things like the eye section, just going around the edge there. On his thumb, for example, where he's gripping the, gripping the handle on the gun. Yeah, anywhere you want to fix any little splurges. Now there's just a couple of greens to finish off our base coats. So what I'd mentioned earlier about changing up the ammo boxes, this is US Olive Drab, because I figure if they're still using some Lend-Lease equipment, then the British probably aren't going to bother painting the ammo cases. And then I'm going to use refractive green to paint in the helmets, which is the same way as I'd paint them on my infantry. Once this had time to settle and dry, in my palette over here, what I've mixed up, this is 2 parts strong tone to 1 part speed paint medium. That's part of the reason why I really like dropper bottles. It's super easy to figure that out. We're going to apply this over the entire miniature. The speed paint medium is there basically to make sure that this doesn't collect too heavily anywhere. All the same, drench our whole fella. This is none too complex. And we'll give them a good half an hour or so to dry. See what we have once that is settled. Ta-da! We're mostly done. There's plenty of shading. The miniature looks a little bit more interesting to look at now. You could spend a fair bit of time adding, visual interest on the back here. Maybe even do some glowing effect in this weird little ridge section here. But I've chosen to keep it kind of like the ones on the product page. Relatively simple. But I do want to add just a little bit more depth to the armor. So what I have is some Command Khaki and one of the wedge tip dry brushes from the Army Painter, because I quite like these for that wedge. What I'm going to do is just lightly flick, so flicking along the edges, trying to catch just the exposed bits of machinery and detail. If you do end up catching a little bit of the green or what have you, don't worry too much. It's not going to be immensely visible once we varnish this guy. And then the last thing to do is to finally grab yourself a red, either contrast or speed paint, something that you like there. I'm going to use Poppy Red for this from the Army Painter. And let's go ahead and pop this over the eye thingies. Now, once this is dry, what I'm going to do is take them outside and hit them with a matte varnish as an almost final step. There's one last thing to do after this. And as I'm always saying, what a difference a varnish makes. So if ever you're worried about a wash or a shade or something drying shiny, just varnish the miniature. It's nice and simple. It's not just about protecting your paint job, it's also about creating a different finish, which works quite well. Now the last thing I'm going to do is to do off screen, because I actually have to hold the miniature up quite close to my face for this. I'm going to put a tiny dot of white up on the eye thingamajigger, and then I'm going to hit them with a gloss varnish. Then what I'm going to do is finish off their bases. The recipe for that will be in the description. So let's go ahead and get a look at our mad robots once they're all finished. And so there at last, our automated infantry are complete. And they're just so silly. I love them. They kind of remind me of the K2 droids from Star Wars, the big Imperial ones like K2SO, because they look really spindly. But on the other hand, if you were to imagine something twice the height of a man just turning around, balling up one of those fists and punching you, they don't look quite so silly anymore. All the same, the design is fabulous. Now I am really looking forward to the Warlord resin ones that are going to come in the starter army, along with the Galahad suits, because that'll make a pretty decent chunk of specialist infantry, which you need to make the core of a Konflikt 47 army. I love this one. This kind of squatting dude as he comes around. I love him to bits. They're a lot of fun to paint, and they are very simple. You could spend a lot of time doing additional bits and pieces, little bits of exposed metalwork, piping and what have you, maybe some rust effects, but I just want to get these guys on the table, and I wanted to do something for the channel just before October ends. So as always, thanks goes out to Exit23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram, they're both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.